Okay, well, it looks like it's about 1:30, so we'll go
Okay.
ahead and get started. The session is being recorded, and you'll be able to find that later out on the conference agenda. At this time, I'm going to turn the session over to Doug with David Kent Consulting. And with that, go ahead, Doug.
Okay, can you all see my screen? Hello, everyone. I'm Doug Sewell from David Kent Consulting, and this session is going to be lessons I learned importing non-CDB databases, non-container databases into pluggable databases. It's going to be interesting when you get to do this, because container databases, they're the new normal for Oracle. Once you get to 20C, they de-support non-container databases. So if you haven't already containerized your databases, you are going to need to do so. This session is going to give you some information and assistance for when you get to that point. Some of the folks I've seen already have been through this, and so we'll help you. So we're going to touch on a little bit of the background of what CDBs are and PDBs and why you want them, a couple of lessons learned, and some tips and gotchas that will help you through the transition. This presentation is brought to you by David Kent Consulting. We are a group of experienced Banner, Oracle, and cloud professionals that provide functional and technical services to higher education. Our goal is to help you get the highest possible return on your investment in Banner. My background, I worked for Youngstown State for 32 years in the mainframe environment, and originally as a system administrator. I moved into database administration with our legacy database, and then eventually with Oracle. I have 15 years of experience with Banner, and I've been with David Kent for over 10 years, full-time since the end of 2015. So anyway, why you want them? This is the thing, is the first, Oracle describes what they are. Multi-tenant architecture enables an Oracle database to function as a multi-tenant. A CDB contains 0, 1, or many customer-created PDBs. I have some illustrations that'll probably make more sense. Okay, this is a non-container database, what you would have had at 10G, for example, or what you may have now in 19C. You have the non-container database. It has your control file, redo logs, archive logs, password, and SP file as database data files, and memory processes and resources. Then you have a container database. It has the same things on the right-hand side for your root container. And then you have your data files for your individual pluggable databases that are contained inside the database, so that you can have one database serves multiple databases, virtual databases effectively. And then you have also a single tenant container database. This is effectively the same as a non-container database, but it follows the pluggable standards. You'll have your same thing at the right, and then you'll have just one PDB. That's what a single tenant container database is. That's important because Aleutian products, Banner, ODS, DegreeWorks only support single tenant container databases. They don't support the multi-tenant databases at this time. Benefits, as I said, first, it's required by Oracle starting with 20C. You don't have an option. And if you want to stay supported with Oracle, you're going to have to go with them sooner or later. They're also supported by Aleutian, although some of these have been relatively recent since they supported them. I have actually converted Banner databases, DegreeWorks databases, and ODS databases into them by various means that I'm going to talk about today. It is largely transparent to your applications. You're going to have to do some tweaks that I'm going to get to at the end of the presentation, but it's largely transparent to your applications. It very much simplifies cloning. Instead of running an RMAN job, you don't have to use RMAN at all to do it. You can just drop the pluggable database in your test environment and recreate the pluggable database with 1 or 2 commands, and it's ready to go. and it seems to run a little faster also. You have potential overhead savings for non-banner databases. If you have a Atomic, you might be able to use this. If you have some other services, you might be able to use this, because with 19C, you can have up to 3 pluggable databases inside a container database. So if you have a bunch of small Oracle databases, you could consolidate them potentially for some savings. There are challenges. Learning new technology. I like to learn new things, but I've seen how technology changes have driven people out of the workplace. And you might hear something, I'll be retired before I have to deal with that. And some people just don't enjoy learning the new technology in the same way, but it will be learning some new technology. You're going to have to change connection strings. That's just a given. I will talk about that at the end of my presentation. You're going to have to change some scripts in operational practice. For example, the way you clone will change. Scripts that use /assistdba will probably have to change. Transparent data encryption. It's anything but transparent during setting up a new pluggable database. I worked a number of times with Oracle Cloud, and Oracle Cloud requires you to use transparent data encryption. As a result, you have to be prepared for it, and you got a dance of about 10, 15 commands to get it all activated in some cases. Part 2, lessons learned from 3 methods creating PDBs from non-CDB databases. I have used data pump, export, and import. That works, and I'm going to talk about that in a little more detail. I've used DBMS PDB and copied data files from one database to another, and I've cloned by way of a database link, and that's actually the same way as you would clone a database once you're already in containers. So each of these has pitfalls, each of these has advantages, so I'm going to talk about each of those. Data pump. If you've got a situation where you have to change platforms, like for example, if you're going from AIX or Solaris to Linux, for example, you're going to have to use data pump at some point anyway. If you want to do an upgrade without going through DBUA, you can do this by way of a data pump. I've done this to get from 12.1 to 12.2 in an environment where I could not touch the production system at all. I could just get access to go into the database and pull data out with data pump, and I was able to do that to get from 12.1 to 12.2 on the same platform. You can restructure your table spaces. I've had some clients, they had 30 or so data files for one table space, and they were all like 4 or 8 gig. So we consolidated some of those at the same time. These are benefits for data pump, whether you're going to a pluggable database or not in some cases. This method is also usable when moving from an on-site to the cloud environment. What you don't want in that case is to have a live connection from the database for the duration of your creation. I have just found that whether my home connection or connections between environments, they're either slow or they're a little bit fragile. So having your data pulled separate from your PDB creation, I find that to be very advantageous, and that's one of the benefits of doing it by data pump. Now, you got some other challenges though. You have to do some preparation before you do the data pump import, and you have to do some cleanup. For example, you have to define your table spaces. You have to create your profiles. You have to prepare to do all of the sys grants. Aleutian has an article. It's a little dated because it was talking about going about 11G to 12.1, but that article is still helpful. It has a script that will help you get the table space definitions. It will help you get the sys grants. It will help you get some other information. It'll also tell you about banner packages that you need to run over again afterwards. And that really helped me out when I was migrating from AIX to Linux, because it said, these are the things that you need to look at and take care of. And that will still help you, even though, as I said, it's a bit dated. You can still take advantage of much of what is in it.
Doug,
This, yes.
before you go on, there's some questions that are popping up in the question and answer. Would you like to take them in succession, or would you like to wait until the end?
I'm going to be finishing this section up in a couple of slides, and I could take some questions then.
Okay, sounds good.
So just a little bit.
Okay.
This will encrypt your data in a TDE environment, and if that is important for having your data at rest encrypted and not just having TDE enabled, this will do it. There is one big downside I found to this, and I saw one of the folks from Messiah where we found this. Oracle Application Express. Oracle Application Express did not play well with Data Pump. Reason why? The Application Express information won't transport by export Data Pump and import Data Pump. The schemas are protected. I had to use Apex Administrative Services to export the Apex pieces, and then I had to import them. This was something that I have only worked a little bit with Apex, and this is the first client I had that had a well-developed Apex environment and development process. And so we had to get that working. And after you run the cleanup, you need to import the scripts. And it was a real learning experience. This script page just shows you, and you can come back to this when you download the PDF. This tells you how to find out if Apex is even installed. If it is installed, you have to have the correct version for your target database. For example, they had databases that were using Apex 504 and had to upgrade to Apex 18.2 in one case. And then the other thing is you can say is Apex is installed, but do you have any user workspaces? This query will give you some user workspaces. If you find more than these three that are on here, and again, you can come back to this after the presentation, it means that you had Apex development at some time and you have to manage that as part of your data pump export and import process. If you lived in the IBM mainframe world, particularly in the late 70s and 80s, you saw this. So I've got time for some questions and answers right now. Go ahead, Dave.
Okay, so the first question, Daniel Lindahl is asking the question to clarify what you said about 19C having up to 3 pluggable databases in a container database. He's asking for clarification, saying that's a licensing restriction, correct? As in, you can only have 3 without paying for an enhanced license.
That is correct. That is correct. You get 3 for free. But after that, you have to pay for more.
And hello, Charles. Okay, so M. Hurling, LBCC, how is multi-tenant or PDB architecture any different from having 5 non-pluggable database DBs sharing the same Oracle home? Very good question.
Well, one of the differences is your overhead. For example, your SGA, your log files, your archive log files, those are shared between all of the pluggable databases inside one container because the container manages those. They're not touched. So if you have 5 pluggable databases inside one, you're going to have to define it bigger than you would an individual, but you'll have less processes altogether because you won't have the 30, 50, 100 processes that Oracle starts up when the database starts for each database. You'll have it for the container, and then you'll have processes for the individual connections. So there's an overhead savings there. That's probably the biggest benefit, and that's probably the biggest difference. So it could lead to needing less resources in the VM. It could lead to being able to support more databases in one VM.
And that was from Mark Hurling at LVCC. Okay, so someone's asking, is TDE an extra licensing cost, transparent data encryption, anonymous attendee, or is it free? Transparent
Honestly,
data
I can't
encryption.
answer that. I can't answer that. And the reason why is because on the client sites that are on premises, I have not encountered transparent data encryption. On the client sites that are going to Oracle Cloud, it comes with Oracle Cloud because Oracle mandates you use it. So I can't answer that question. You'll have to talk to your Oracle representative on that, or maybe Google. I could probably find out for that and post back later, but I don't want to take time from the session now to research that.
There's another
Okay.
question from David. David, forgive me if I mispronounce your last name, Shakarjan. Does the Apex complexities with data pump approach apply to minimal ORDS install only used to migrate mod PL SQL for Banner SSB8? Do the Apex complexities apply in that
Okay.
situation?
That is with Apex pieces that are in the database. Whether you are using ORDS or whether you're using mod PLSQL won't have that effect. If you use data pump to move it and you have an Apex installation, you're going to have to move the Apex pieces separately from moving most of the data itself. If you use one of the other conversion methods, then Apex just comes along and it works out better. But this is true regardless of the interface web-wise that you use to get to Apex. If you're using ORDS, if you're using mod PLSQL, you're good.
And
ready to go
Charles
on?
Muhu asks the question. Charles Muhu asks the question: how are schema objects managed at the root, or at the? Or he means at the container database level, or at the pluggable level? Schema is pluggable, correct?
Yes. Your Banner database will live at the PDB level. That means that you will create users in the PDB. You will only have your Oracle default users and some users that are named as common users, and that those common users come into play with cloning. But those are the only ones that you're going to have in the root, like sys, sysman, ordsys, the various schemas that are in your base install when you get an empty database. Those are going to be managed in the root. And all of your Banner users, all your Banner table spaces, that will be in a pluggable database. They will not be in the root. So that's where you're going to have to go back and forth between the container and the root sometimes. And I'll talk about that in a little bit.
Okay, and Brian Bakula is providing some additional support for the question of TDE being part of the baseline product, or is it an extra cost? And he says TDE is part of advanced security at an extra cost. That is also being confirmed by Leslie Hurst at Northern Michigan University. Welcome.
Hi, Leslie.
I think it's an additional cost as well. And then an anonymous attendee says TDE is part of Oracle Advanced Security, which is an additional license pack.
Okay,
So
that's been 5 questions. I'll move on and then pick up a few more questions in a little bit.
Sure.
Okay. The second method that I used was DBMS PDB and copying data files. This is usable when moving from an on-site to cloud environment because you just copy your data files and you're copying your XML file up to the cloud. And then once that's done, you could check some of them at each end in order to make sure that they're good, and then you can import them. It does require a database outage because you have to get the clean data files out of the database. Or you can, as I did with one school, I cloned the database over from one database VM to another database VM. I upgraded it from their current environment to 19C. I uploaded the 19C clone up to the cloud and then imported that into a PDB. The source and target databases, they should be the same version, the same OS, and the same RU level. Now, you could possibly get away with the RU level differing a little bit. The compat will do it, but I really prefer to have the RU levels match. It's better all the way around to do that. You will also have the same number of data files in the PDB as you had for the CDB, because it's just going to take all those data files in to the database and make them a part of that pluggable database. If you're copying data files into a database with TDE enabled, this will not automatically encrypt your data. TDE will be active, but because you didn't reload the data, it won't automatically encrypt the data that it is sitting at rest. And it will actually, there are queries you can do to tell you if the table spaces are encrypted. That's just something to know. What you do is you're going to start your source database read-only. There's where one of your outages comes. You're going to run this program to generate an XML file. That XML file is going to tell the layout of your source database. You edit the XML file because if you have to upload it or move it to another machine, you may not have the exact same file system layout, and you can edit that XML to change the file system if you have to. You want to stop the database, copy the data files along with the XML file up to your new location. And then you're going to use DBMS PDB to check the compatibility. That's going to check to see if there's problems between the two data files, between the two databases that you need to address, and then run the process again. Then you run create pluggable database. This command, you can come back to this. This is going to tell you where to find the XML file, and it will allow you to also set a source path and target path. For example, if you want your source path is on disk and your target path is in ASM, you can do that. If you want to restructure your layout to put UO2 or a data CDB/PDB1/data files, you can do that. So you can change the layout of your data files to something that makes more sense if you wish. Then you run the non-CDB to PDB, and that will go through, that will run about 10 minutes or so and clean up some things in the conversion. Then you have to turn TDE on. This is that 10 or 15 step dance that I talked about a little earlier that you need to do for the new PDB if you have TDE. Okay. Cloning into a PDB via database link. This does not require a source database outage. That's a good thing. It works best when the source and target servers are close network-wise, like for example, both on-prem or both on the cloud, because you don't have less likelihood of the process being interrupted unexpectedly. It can work from on-prem to cloud, but I don't do it. I use another method instead, and that's as much my preference probably as anything. The source and target databases, again, the same version, OS and RU level. You'll have the same number of data files just like before. And like the last method, it's not going to automatically encrypt your data. And process of cloning between CDBs is similar. So that you'll find that once you've done this, you'll find that cloning by a PDB is very similar. Overview of the procedure here. You create a database link in the target database accessing the source database. That's going to access one of those common users typically at the source. Well, actually, since your source database is not a CDB, it doesn't have to be a common user, but it would be a user that has some privileges. You run create pluggable database, PDB name from this. That's really it. You type that in and come back an hour later and your database is created. Maybe a few minutes less, maybe a few minutes more, but that's all you do to get it into the database. Then you run non-CDB to PDB. Again, turn your transparent data encryption on. And that's all there is to it. Yes.
Doug, back up a minute to that last slide. Is that, so the user that you use there when you create that DB link, should that be sys or system or not, or something different?
I have used system, for example. Now, and that's just because he's always there. You have to grant a couple of extra privileges, but it could be any database user that has the right privileges. And I think you have to create pluggable database to the user.
What about the sys objects then, and the sys grants, pardon me, and any foreign grants and things like that? Will those come across if you don't
Those
have,
come
if you don't
across
use?
transparently. Those come
Okay,
across transparently, but they live at the PDB level. They don't live in the root CDB. They live at the PDB
got it,
level. So in your
got
banner
it.
instance, all of your data files, all your sys stuff, sysocs, all of your grants and permissions, those will all come across intact with both creating by copying data files or creating by database link. You don't have to regenerate those the way you do with a data pump.
Got it.
Okay, tips and gotchas. These are some of the things the lessons that I learned in the process that I wanted to share some of them. The first lesson I shared, as I said, was application express and having to deal with that in a data pump environment. And that would be true whether you were going into a container database or whether you were just migrating applications. I just haven't had to work with application express before. So it was interesting. Couple of important tips. First one, make a playground. I have a VM at a cloud hosting site, and I built a couple of small databases to play with. And I set up one as a container database, one as a non-container database. And I tested these different ways to get them in. And I actually used it to do a demonstration for another David Kent DBA and for a client on how to do this to get the database in. Pardon me. So set up a playground with a couple of small databases. Get familiar and comfortable with the process first. Once you're satisfied with what you learned, clone a banner database to something else. You don't need application servers or anything like that, but clone a banner database apart from your working instances and start experimenting with that. Here's a couple of additional hints. This is how you get between the root and the PDB. When you log in ordinarily, it's going to put you in CDB root, and you have to alter session set container equal test, for example. And so you can go back and forth. You can also set the to-task environment variable to automatically go into a PDB. The problem you'll have here is /sysdba doesn't work when to-task is set. Just like it doesn't work if you're on a remote like your job sub server. You can't use /sysdba to get back to your database server. It's same thing if you're on the database server and to-task environment is set. So that's one of those things that you need to think about when if you have applications that need to do some things in the root and some things in the application level. RMAN backups. The RMAN backups pretty much work the same. You're going to back up the container. You're not going to worry about the pluggable databases because when you back up the container, the pluggable databases will come along with it. And so you won't really have to make much change to your RMAN job, if at all. You're just going to need to point it to the container rather than the name that you had of your non-container database. So if you move test into test CDB, and test is now a pluggable database inside test CDB, then you would back a test CDB, not test.
Doug?
Yes.
Brian Stuckey had a comment for you on one
Peter.
of the things.
Peter
Sorry,
Stuckey.
Peter Stuckey had a comment for you on one of the things you were going over. He mentioned
Yes.
or banner data defense, solution added value for advanced security.
Okay.
So
I'm not
yes,
familiar with that product.
So anybody that happens to own Banner Data Defense, which is an Illusion product, and I think what Peter Stuckey is saying here is Illusion added some value to the advanced security option that was provided by Oracle, and so with some, Illusion specific application there.
I'm not familiar with that, but that's something I will probably encounter somewhere along the way.
And an anonymous attendee is also asking the question, okay, my understanding is that we have to upgrade Apex to 18.2 before we can upgrade to 19C. Our current version is 4.x.
That
Do you
is
know for sure,
correct.
Doug?
I can answer that specifically. When you run the pre-upgrade script, pre-upgrade Java file that Oracle gives you to test your preparation for doing an upgrade before you run DBUA, it will tell you that you have to upgrade Apex to a particular version. For example, if you're going to database 12.2, you have to upgrade Apex to at least 5.04. If you are going to 19C, it will tell you you have to go to at least Apex 18.2. And trust me, I learned this the hard way. You must do that before you do the upgrade. If you try to do the upgrade and let DBUA upgrade Apex for you, it will cause you some headaches. Trust me, I guarantee you, if it says upgrade Apex before you do it, you really want to do that. So yes, you are going to have to go to Apex 18.2 if you're going to go to 19C database. That is a fact. Naming conventions. This is just a hint that you have. Yeah, for example, you have Upger and Upger CDB, test and test CDB. Now, if you had FINAID, would you use FINIS CDB or FAD CDB? That depends. If you are doing something programmatically that says, look at the instance, chop off the CDB at the end, and that tells me the pluggable database that's inside it, then conventions are helpful because you don't have to work around the exceptions. You can call them whatever you want within reason, but conventions are very helpful. Now, this is a couple of commands that are going to be helpful, and understanding the differences are going to help you also. For example, show container name. That'll show you the database name for a non-CDB database. If you're in the root, it'll tell you CDB root. If you're in a pluggable database, it'll tell you where you're at. So if you lose track of where you're at in SQL+, you can do show con name, and it'll tell you. Show con ID gives you a numerical value that is attached to the name. For a given container name, you'll also have a corresponding container ID. And show con ID will give you that information. Now, this is one of those gotchas. If you go to $$ database, name created in CDB, the name and created are going to be the same, whether it's a non-CDB or CDB root or a PDB container. It's not going to tell you what the PDB you're in. It's going to tell you the CDB. So if you have code that pulls from $$ database to see what the database name is, this is one of those changes you're going to have to make. And the name is the database name, as I said, or container. Created is the data was created. That's not the day the pluggable database was created. That's the day the container was created. So if you're looking to see how fresh data is, this is not going to tell you that because the pluggable database is different. I found the easiest way to tell how fresh the data is select max Spriden activity date from Spriden, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And CDB equal yes for container database or no for a non-container database. So that's $$ database. So if you use that in some of your programs, you may need to make changes. The $$ PDBS view that gives you creation time. 0 rows if you're in a non-container database. Root container gives you 1 for each. And in a pluggable database, it gives you 1 row for your current PDB. And a bonus is 12.1 if you're still on 12.1. $$ PDBS doesn't have the creation time field, so you can't use that to tell you how fresh your data is. Syscontext. This is going to be one where if you're getting your database name for like a report header, for example, this is going to return the database name for the container or the non-container. So if you want the pluggable database instead, you're going to have to make some changes. So if you use instead of instance name, you use container name in this query, it'll return the database for a non-CDB, root for the root container, or if you're in a pluggable database, it'll return the pluggable database name. And you can actually pull both of them and compare them to see if it's going to, what kind of environment you're in. Service names. This is an important thing to know about pluggable databases. With a pluggable database, you don't connect to a SID. You have to use service names. Oracle has been pushing us towards service names for a while anyway, but that means you're going to have TNS names Aura. And now if you have TNS names Aura distributed out to desktops, all of those are going to have to be updated too, if you had SIDs before. In your JDBC connections in Tomcat for your Banner 9 applications, for example, if you were using a SID, you're going to have to convert that to service name syntax. If you're using Oracle Relational Oracle REST Data Services, ORDS, to connect, you have to configure that to connect to the service name rather than the SID. And if you have host language code in PHP or Perl or some other language that connects, you're going to have to look at your connect strings in there. And also, you can't use the SP file to create your additional service names. You have to use DBMS service create service. And Aleutian has an article that may be helpful. If you're having trouble getting ESM to connect to a pluggable database for one reason or another, and this article explains what those circumstances are, then it tells you how to work around that. Now, we're down to the end of this. So you want to containerize your databases. At some time, you're not going to have a choice. So you're going to want to do it, or maybe contract with someone to do it for you. There are several ways to do it. Each of them has trade-offs. You've seen 3 ways. There's other ways to do it as well, but these are probably the most common ways you're going to encounter. And you want to practice and test and practice and test before you actually do it with a real database. And you need to review and update your code that's sensitive to the database instance name, or if it's sensitive to the change between a SID and a service name. Now, any more questions?
Good question, anonymous attendee. Can non-CDB convert to CDB?
They would convert to a pluggable database, a PDB, inside a CDB. And that's what I was talking about in this talk.
If you're using a DB link to clone, do you still have to worry about Apex like you do with Data Pump?
No, that is an issue that is only specific to Data Pump. I have proved this with using copying data files and with using database link. Apex comes over because it's basically copying data files over just like an RMAN duplicate. So if Apex would come over an RMAN duplicate, that's going to come over the same. It's not using maybe the same technology, but it's same kind of thinking that your data file is going to come over pretty much intact. So no problems with Apex in that case.
Excellent. Excellent question, Lucas Jones. Thank you. Just to confirm, we will be upgrading from 12CR2 to 19C and moving from Solaris to Red Hat. Data Pump is my only option for the upgrade, correct?
That is correct, but you do not have to containerize the same time unless you want to. That might be the ideal time to do it, however.
M. Hurling, LBCC again. Are there any really good resources on helping to understand the difference between non-CDB and pluggable database and the pluggable database CDB architectures? I think there are.
On one of the slides, one of my early slides, I referred to an Oracle book, but there's actual books that will talk about multi-tenant architecture in Oracle. And it's PDFs you can download from Oracle, and they will explain them. I give you a very quick overview about the things that we need to be concerned about for Banner. I didn't talk about application databases, application containers. I didn't talk about the PDB seed because those weren't immediately meaningful. But if you want to learn more about this pluggable database architecture, Oracle has some publications out for that.
Okay, and Helen Scallis and John Scanlon are asking where you can get a copy of the slides and also the recording. If you go to the full agenda and you click on the session, there will be 2 links there. One link will take you to the recording and the other link will take you to the slides, and you can download away.
I have made a couple of minor edits to the slides after they were posted. If you want an updated one, you can contact me for it. They're not going to really make a lot of difference in the presentation, but if you want my changes, you can email me and I will send it out to you.
Okay, and Brian Bakula, $V instance and show parameter service name show CDB versus PDB name, like your $V database example.
Parameters are stored in the SP file, and so that's likely to show you the same thing as you're going to get. You're going to probably get the root in a container environment rather than your individual instance.
I think what Brian is saying is if you query $V instance instead of $V database, you'll get that service name parameter inside $V instance will show you either CDB or PDB.
Well, that's helpful. I don't tend to use those. If I was programming something that is going to be run by a non-privileged user, I would probably use syscontext instead, because that doesn't require you to have access to the various dictionaries views that you need to be a DBA or a privileged user to do.
Got it. Okay, so Charles, on the East Coast, if I have a 19C non-container database, can I then come along and create a CDB, PDB, and then copy the non-PDB to the new PDB that I just created? And what are the limitations for that to work?
The only limitation is your disk space, because you're going to have for some period of time potentially 2 copies of data files.
Okay.
But otherwise, and the fact that you're running 2 databases at once rather than one. So if you're in a resource constrained environment, you might have to bump resources up.
Great. All right. So anonymous attendee asks, you mentioned Ellucian does not support pluggable databases. So what do schools do with their 19C DB? So there's some clarification here, Doug.
Actually, Ellucian does support them, but for some of those, the support is fairly recent. For example, ODS was really recent that they started to support pluggable databases. But we did a migration at Messiah University, and everything went into pluggable databases. DegreeWorks, Banner, ODS, and their ancillary databases, all of them went into pluggable databases. We did not have any non-pluggable databases involved when we were done, because this was all going into Oracle Cloud.
And Doug, then further clarification coming from Jack McGann. Just want to confirm that Banner only supports one pluggable database in a container, not multiple PDBs.
That is correct. Ellucian supports a single tenant database. Now, you might be able to put a couple of non-Banner databases in with the pluggable database for Banner, but Banner security gets, as I understand it, Banner security gets a little wonky if you put 2 Banner databases in the same pluggable database. So if you're going to try this, you might put 1 Banner database and 2 non-Banner databases. I would just trust that they know what they're talking about, even though sometimes Ellucian is behind the curve on these things. If you have the option of testing, go right ahead. But officially, they only support a single tenant pluggable database in a container.
Okay, the next question comes from Jerry Stevens, Athens State University, Athens, Alabama. Are there
Hi,
any
Jerry.
benefits or pitfalls from upgrading from 12 CR2 to 19C as a non-CDB and then moving to a CDB later?
If you have the luxury of doing it this way, it's worth doing because you're only changing one thing at a time for starters. Also, you can get to 19C to be on support, and then you can start working through the process of pluggable databases and compatibility and reconfiguring, pardon me just a moment, and reconfiguring all of your environment to talk to a pluggable database after the fact. So that would probably be worthwhile doing if you have the option of doing so.
David Shakarjan. So to be clear, I would likely have issues if I wanted to host a single banner instance and a single DegreeWorks pluggable database in the same CDB. It would be nice to streamline production upgrades via this approach. Absolutely.
I cannot say you would have issues. I will say that Illusion doesn't support it. If you make it work and it works harmlessly for you, great. But if you have problems, then Illusion might tell you the first thing you need to do is separate them. So people that experiment with this, I would love to hear your results. But officially, you will not be supported by Illusion in that environment. Okay.
Okay, Linda.
Okay, it looks like you guys finished right on the money. Perfect.
Awesome.
I had this
So-
pretty well good idea of how long my part would take, so it just depended on the questions. So thank
Well,
you
I
everyone for
appreciate it.
coming.
And yeah,
Linda-
thank you.
Linda, thanks again for all your care and support throughout the conference process here, the
Yes.
onboarding process early on, as well as all the support during the conference. Appreciate it more than I can say. One more question just popped up here. Oh,
Okay.
Bob Getty. Thanks, DKC. All right, Bob Getty, a good friend, Messiah University in Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania. Thanks, Bob.
Yes, we did their cloud migration.
Yep.
Okay, well, I'll go ahead and end the session. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank
Have a great
you.
afternoon.
Yep.
Bye-bye.